I know I am. Yeah. Morning, everyone. When you're thinking, what could possibly go wrong? Well, many things. So, but anyway, nice to see you all. So I'm Will, and together with my wife, Kat, and our two kids, who some of which have probably climbed over you this morning, so apologies for that. But we're members of the family here at West Street. Here's one of them. Hi, Hattie. Come and join me. Okay. Yeah, great. No, thank you. I actually think it's really good that we've got some of the young guys in this morning, because what we're going to talk about this morning I think is really exciting. And if I manage to make this boring, then I think that would be more impressive, because it's a really interesting passage. So it's a really interesting couple of short stories that we're going to look at today, or parables that Jesus told. And even though they both sound quite similar, they each tell us something that's actually quite different about the kingdom of heaven. So this morning we are going to look at the parables of the mustard seed and the yeast. Okay, you see there was some preparation. I've been to Sainsbury's, so so there is actually, you may have either on the way in or found under your seat, there's a question on a strip of paper. So if you could please have a little think about that. You don't have to shout out later, but we're going to come back to it. So if you could have a little think, that would be great. But these stories of the mustard seed and the yeast, they feature in 3 of the 4 Gospels. So they must be good ones if they're repeated that many times. And I appreciate they don't sound very interesting. The mustard seed and the yeast, it's a bit like, the shoe and the paper bag or something, but stay with me because they are actually good. And I'm sure many of you have heard this passage many times. So on that note, I know sometimes when we're kind of going over parables that we've all heard before, we can sometimes kind of settle in and go, oh yeah, heard this one, here we go again. But I love the way that God works. I love that he chooses to reveal different things. And I hope that, certainly not through me, but I hope that he chooses to say something through the words that I say today to you that's new and different. So the passage today is Matthew 13, and the first bit is 31 to 32, verses 31 to 32. And this first bit is about the mustard seed. So I'll just give you a second if you want to turn to it. Otherwise, I'll read it for you now. So Jesus said, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. So this is probably one of the shortest scriptures. That was it. We're going to do one more little bit later, but that was it. And this story is in 2 parts. Neither sound particularly interesting, as I've said, or maybe even godly. But we've been learning over the past few weeks and months about how we should make the message of God as easy to understand for others as possible. And that's not a new idea. We take that from Jesus. Throughout the Bible, he uses stories to illustrate his points. I know we've been hearing over the last couple of weeks some other examples of that. So we've heard about the parable of the sower, and then last week, I wasn't here, but I think you heard about the parable of the wheat and the weeds from Ian. And later in the passage, in verse 34, it says that Jesus only spoke in parables. So he makes the message understandable and relatable for those around him. And the first thing Jesus chooses to explain in this week's story is that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. So one of these tiny little mustard seeds. You can't even see them, but there must be thousands in here. But he is like, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, one of the tiniest seeds in the world. And it's about 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter, a mustard seed. So that means, and we're going to do this in a moment, if you could balance 1,200 of them on top of each other, they still wouldn't be as tall as Graham here. So if someone could just get started on that, that'd be great. Thank you. So why does Jesus choose to say that the kingdom of heaven like a mustard seed? It's a bit of a strange choice, or at least it might seem so at first. So actually, although the mustard seed is one of the smallest, it has the potential to grow into a large, beautiful tree, some as big as 15 to 20 foot. So that is probably, I don't know, somewhere near the top of the screen-ish, something like that. So we're not talking like a house plant. This is like a large, beautiful tree. And a tree that Jesus says makes a home for the birds in its branches. And there are many different understandings we can take from this. One of them is this is a picture of how the church has grown, the church here on earth. So Jesus, joined by just 12 ordinary people, was at the start of a global move of God's kingdom here on earth. The act of God sending his son to earth, a tiny baby born in a manky old barn in the back end of a city somewhere, went on to do incredible things and fulfilled prophecies and ultimately changed mankind's relationship with God forever. But even the way that Jesus fulfilled the prophecy was unexpected to the Jews at the time. Many were expecting a powerful Messiah, perhaps in more kind of conventional earthly terms, so a powerful figure who would come and destroy all the enemies, be victorious on the battlefield. But Jesus came as a man amongst the people, and from this most humble beginning, the most incredible life on earth would go on to transform the world. So if I were to ask and hope that you would take one thing away from this morning, it's that with a little, Jesus chooses to do a lot. That is what the kingdom of heaven is like. And more than that, what I want to say is that what we bring is not the significant thing. And I think that can actually be quite hard for us to hear sometimes. And I'm not saying that God doesn't love our abilities, because he does. He loves our talents. He loves our skills. But ultimately, that's not what he requires from us. That's what the world looks for. Because we live in a world that's all about results, ultimately, isn't it? You know, how good are you at football? How many followers do you have on social media? What were your GCSE, A-level results this week? Look how beautiful that person is. God requires so much more than our skills or talents. And actually, I think the fact that we choose to bring ourselves is the key. So God isn't looking for the most beautiful or talented people. He's looking for those who are the most willing to bring whatever they have, however small we feel that may be. Remember the disciples? They weren't the brightest sparks. They didn't have degrees from Oxford or even the snazziest fishing boats. They just brought themselves as they were. They were willing. And as they did, Jesus worked through them for the glory of his kingdom and ultimately the benefit of millions of others since, including us here in this room. So, coming back to the mustard seed, you can perhaps think of it a little bit like a spark that kind of starts a chain reaction. So the action of planting one of these little seeds in the ground starts a process where this beautiful tree develops from something that in earthly terms is pretty small and insignificant. If you just saw that on the ground, you wouldn't think twice and kick it out of the way, or you wouldn't even bother. It becomes the largest of garden plants, even a tree, so that the birds come and perch in it. Something that becomes a blessing to those around it, provides shade. In the same way as, obviously I'm going to link this back to a car, those of you who know me, in the same way as when we start a car, all we're actually doing is just turning our wrist a little bit. That's really all we do, isn't it? We get in the car and you do that. And you go, I'm starting the car, but really all we're actually doing is turning our hand a bit. Or maybe you've got a newer snazzy car and you press a button. But actually the thought, the intelligence, the design that's gone into all the systems and the computers around the car puts all these different processes into action. And ultimately it starts the car. And it has the potential, the consequence to do loads more, to drive us wherever we want. Our action of choosing to do something actually means that we light the touch paper on a more larger, powerful spiritual thing that goes way beyond our own imagination and our own abilities, and the potential to impact those around us in a really powerful way. Think of the scale of this tiny mustard seed. Again, you can't even see them. They're so small. I'm not going to bother trying to show you, but they're so small, 1 to 2 millimeters. And compare that to this massive, tall tree. And how much more will our offering, you and I, be multiplied for the good of his kingdom if we allow him to grow and nurture us through his Spirit working in us? If you like, the Spirit's acting a little bit like the soil, the water, the sun, the nutrients. Without these things, the mustard seed is just a mustard seed. We need God to work through us in the same way as the kingdom grows through the church. We hear in Matthew 17 about how faith as small as a mustard seed can do amazing things. And in this passage, the disciples were asking about their attempts to drive out demons, and it wasn't quite going as they were going to plan. And they were saying to Jesus, why are we having this trouble? And Jesus says to them, if you had faith as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. So imagine if you started with faith like an acorn. Imagine what would be possible then. So we hear about this seed. It's one of the smallest seeds, and it's deliberate. And I think, actually, if Jesus could have thought of something more unremarkable, more even smaller, I'm pretty sure he probably would have. Jesus chose to use the small and earthly insignificant things to demonstrate how God's kingdom works. And this isn't the first time we've seen Jesus bring the most powerful message the world has ever heard in in a really humble way. So I'm going to come back to that question now. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to think, but can you think of a time, maybe either in the Bible or in your own lives, where God has chosen to reveal his kingdom through something that perhaps in earthly terms seems small, insignificant? Has anyone got any thoughts? On the spot. Okay, not to worry if not. I still think it would be really good to have a think about that question. But there's a couple of examples in the Bible. Think about how Jesus chose to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey instead of a horse. Think about how he chose to hang out with those ordinary people around him. Think about how we're told that Jesus wasn't anything to really look at. There's so many examples throughout the Bible where Jesus just does the exact opposite of what we expect, those things we spoke about earlier, the results that we expect in earthly terms. He chooses to present this incredible message of God's kingdom in a really humble way. And it can be a reminder to us that he can do the incredible with the earthly insignificant and unremarkable. So I think this is the moment you've been waiting for, where potentially my cleaning bill, where I have to pay the church a big cleaning bill for some horrendous stain on the carpet, is going to happen. So, has anyone heard of the combination of Diet Coke and Mentos? Okay, right. Well, that's what we're going to do. David's face says it all. What could possibly go wrong? So, bear with me. The link is a little tenuous, but I think, and the audience is growing because everyone loves a disaster, don't they? Right. Could I have a volunteer, please? Daniel or Ruben, do you fancy volunteer? I don't think you're going to get really messy. I'm not going to guarantee it. So all I want is someone. So what we're going to do, okay, for those of you who aren't familiar with this experiment, there's some reaction that happens, and I'm not going to claim to understand it. When you mix Mentos with Diet Coke, something happens, which you'll see in a moment, which can be quite interesting. So what I want to do, hi Hattie. So what I want to do is, if you're up for it, one of you boys, I want you to measure how high the Diet Coke goes when I put the Mentos in the bottle, okay? So you're going to have to watch. So we're going to see Diet Coke come out of the top of that bottle, and I want you to, as it does it, to try and tell us how high it goes, okay? What do you think? Are you up for it? You could do it. You could almost do it from there if you want, Daniel. You could almost do it from there. Okay, don't worry if not. We've got plenty of people to watch. Right. So people on Zoom, I might disappear for a second, but bear with us. Okay. Are we all ready? Hi, Hattie. Our daughter may be covered in Diet Coke. Okay. Are we ready? Can we have a countdown from 5? 5. 4. Hold that. Reset. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks, George. You're welcome, mate. So, I bottled it a bit there. This morning in the garden, I did 6 Mentos. I only did 4 then, but anyway. But the point I'm trying to make, and it's a little tenuous, is that this tiny little Mento, compared to the size of this Coke bottle, had the potential to do so much more. And on its own, it's just a Mento, it's just a little mint. It will be gone in a few seconds if you eat it. But it had this amazing reaction to entertain, to do something completely that caught maybe some of us out that we weren't expecting. And God chooses to use these tiny little things that we bring ourselves for his glory. And I'm really glad that my tarp is even dry, which is great. I remember Lois Woolley, when she visited us a couple of weeks ago, she said something that really stayed with me. She says that God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. Or in other words, God doesn't wait for us to be the best versions of ourselves before he works in us, but instead, because he works in us, we become the best version of ourselves. In 2 Corinthians, we hear about the fact that when we are weak or small, if you like, in him we are strong. His power is made perfect in our weakness. So my challenge is this: let's choose to bring ourselves, small as we are, to him, and let's allow ourselves to be transformed from one of these small seeds into beautiful plants that do good for those around us, all because of him and his transforming love. That's what the kingdom of heaven is like. So, linked to that, we're going to move on to the second part of the passage, which is only one verse. So for those of you who've still got your Bibles, it's Matthew 13, verse 33. And Jesus says, he told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked through all the dough. So firstly, 60 pounds of flour, it's about 27 kilos in modern money. That is a lot of flour. That's about the same as about 3 dogs, 14 of Wes's trumpets, or how many donuts do you think that would make, Rach? Oh no. Right, question was, 27 kilos of flour, how many donuts would that make? A lot. Correct. Very accurate answer there, Rach. Thank you. A lot. So, according to the BBC Good Food recipe, it would make about 1,060 donuts, apparently. So quite a lot. The point is, this woman is not in the business of making a small batch. So, just for a moment, I want to actually consider also that between these 2 passages, we hear 2 quite different things. We hear about a man planting a seed and a woman mixing yeast, or rather, what I think is trying to be said here: whatever your background, you are qualified to work for the good of his kingdom. But back to the yeast. So the yeast, like the mustard seed, is tiny, as I'm going to demonstrate. So this, you can't even hear it rattle because it's so small. For those of you that have made bread, it looks more like a powder. I don't even know if you can see that. It's really, really tiny. And even that is actually some yeast kind of grouped together. So on average, it's only 3 to 4 microns. That means if you divided a millimeter into 1,000, it would be like 3 or 4 of those bits. So it's really, really tiny. And this means, again, we're going to do it in a moment, if you could stack 514,285 of these on top of each other, they still wouldn't be as tall as Graham. But question, has anyone tried to make bread here before? Yeah, okay, yeah, did it work? Okay, yeah, did you use yeast? Yeah, okay, yeah. So as you probably know then, for those of you that have given this a go, yeast works quite silently. It's almost a little bit secret. You mix it into the bread, into the flour, the water, the salt, and it starts working silently, and it's really clever and complicated actually. And there's over 1,500 types of yeast, and they all work in a slightly different way depending on the bread that you use. Again, those of you who make bread, it's really important the type of flour that you use, even the type of water that goes into it. So a yeast and the type of yeast makes a massive difference to ultimately the bread that comes out at the end. So in the same way as the mustard tree needs the soil, the sun, the water to grow, the yeast also needs the flour and the water and the salt to grow and expand into something delicious. So fortunately, God's kingdom will prevail with or without us, but God chooses to work with us, the people here, his church, to bring his word to the people. And we are those who have been chosen to deliver God's kingdom. So it might be comforting to know that basically all the flour, the water and the salt did is turn up in the bowl. That was their role. And the yeast is the thing that actually transformed them into the bread. So has anyone here tried to make bread without yeast? Mary's tried. How did it go? You had a bit of a... Okay, so there's a great demonstration from Mary's example there, that if you forget the yeast, all you end up with is a bit of a slush of flour and water. So ultimately, the flour, the water, the salt can never become what they're truly capable of without the intervention of the yeast that grows and develops to create a delicious loaf of bread. Without the yeast, they would just be the original parts, just some ingredients sat there in a bowl, not being much good to anyone. Now, some of you know I dabble in a bit of cider making. Yeast is very important in cider making as well. And what happens is you get your apple juice at the start of making cider, and you can either put yeast in, or you can wait for the yeast that are natural in the apples to start getting to work. And this can be a really nerve-wracking time, because it can take maybe a week or two for anything to look like it's happening. But when the juice is just sat there and it looks like nothing's happening, what's happening in the background is the yeast is basically, it's populating, it's doing something, it's developing and growing, and the population can grow thousands of times, but it looks like nothing's happening. And then suddenly it's like, bam, you suddenly get this explosion of like foam comes out the top, and it's really messy, and it's carnage. But when you see that, you're like, okay, it's going to be all right. Otherwise, you just sat there with a batch of apple juice that's just going to go up. So it's messy, but the messy bit is good. But the point is, it's all happening, and this transformation is happening long before you actually see this explosion and this activity. So God takes time to change our hearts so that what we give out is real and from him. He changes us from the inside out, and each in our own unique way. So going back to the cider, no matter how hard I tried to get this ultimate consistency, it never really happens. It never really is the same every year, because the yeast is so complicated, and the juice that comes in is always slightly different. And the point is, the way God works in each of us, we're all slightly different, so we're all going to bring different things to his kingdom. But ultimately, it's that transforming power that makes the difference. So coming to the end, I'd like to make a really obvious statement. Bread doesn't exist to be bread. It exists to be enjoyed. What a waste it would be if we put all this effort with the flour, the yeast, the water, the salt, we expertly combined it, we made this perfect loaf, and it just sat there on the kitchen side with no one eating it. What a waste it would be. So God transforms us so that we can bring his transforming love to others, so that we can be the bread that energizes and builds others up by his love. In Ezekiel 47, it talks about how the Spirit comes to us on its way to the world. It's not about us. We in the church are not the end destination, but God changes us for the sake of those who we meet. We're told to go and make disciples of all nations. So let's challenge ourselves to recognize that though what we bring may be small, his transforming power is great. The kingdom of heaven transforms from the smallest mustard seed to the largest tree. And we are transformed like the bread that has yeast mixed through the whole dough, that it makes something delicious that can bless others. So not for us or because of us, but because of his kingdom and the good of his kingdom. All we need to do is bring the little that we have ourselves. Let's allow God to change us from the inside out so that we can be the thing that encourages those around us. Let's not be bread that exists to be bread. Thank you, everyone.